Who invited her? The words cracked against the wood-paneled chamber. Every head turned. Every eye locked on her, the only black woman in the room. She didn't flinch. She sat in a white suit, posture calm, one hand resting on the table, the other casually holding a phone as if she'd been waiting for this exact strike. Laughter rippled from two directors down the line. A smirk curled on another's lips. The woman who had spoken, silver hair, sharp suit, confidence oozing entitlement, leaned forward with a smile that wasn't a smile at all. This is a $5 billion negotiation, not an open door. She doesn't belong here. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was charged. The kind of silence that carries history. A silence that has weighed on every black professional who has ever walked into a room and been told, without words or with them, that their very presence was a mistake. She didn't argue, didn't rise, didn't meet insult with insult. She simply looked at the table, the papers stacked like bricks of false certainty, and breathed. A stillness deeper than anger. The kind of stillness that unsettles the people who think noise equals power. In the far corner, a junior associate swallowed hard, eyes flicking between the woman in white and the portraits on the walls. He pressed his phone face down, screen glowing red. Recording. He knew this moment was bigger than minutes and numbers. It was legacy colliding with truth. One of the men at the table chuckled low. "This isn't charity, sweetheart. This is corporate blood sport." Another leaned back in his leather chair, voice dripping disdain. Whoever let her in should reconsider their judgment. But the woman in white, she neither bristled nor blinked. She adjusted the cuff of her sleeve, lifted the phone to her ear, and whispered two words no one in that room yet understood. "Stand by." And for the first time, the smirks faltered. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to her. Because what happened in that boardroom wasn't just a clash of ego. It was the quiet opening of a storm that would cancel a $5 billion deal in less time than it takes to refill a glass of water. She hadn't come here to be recognized. That was the irony. The woman in white, her name still unspoken in the room, walked into this board meeting without entourage, without designer labels, without a badge that screamed rank. Just a tailored suit, a leather portfolio, and the calm eyes of someone who had seen this movie before. On purpose. Because she knew how boardrooms worked. She knew how faces decided value long before numbers did. And today, she wasn't here to impress. She was here to measure. To see who at this table revealed themselves before the real game began. At 23, fresh from her first $1 million property deal, she had stepped into a different boardroom, same mahogany, same stairs, and been mistaken for the assistant meant to pour water. They handed her the jug. She poured. Smiled, then signed the closing documents as the lead investor. The silence that followed had felt just like this one, thick, choking, exposing. That memory lived in her bone. Now, decades later, the numbers weren't in millions, they were in billions. And yet, the script hadn't changed. A new set of faces, the same reflex. She doesn't belong. Around the table, voices hummed low. She's not on the roster. Is she from legal? An observer, maybe. The dismissals stacked like cards, flimsy but loud. She stayed still, silent, listening. The silver-haired woman leaned back in her chair, smugness settling in. This meeting is reserved for board members and key stakeholders. Whoever invited her has wasted our time. The men nodded. Some smirked. One checked his watch, already bored of the spectacle. But she didn't shrink. She adjusted her portfolio on the table, as if claiming space with the smallest gesture. The junior associate in the corner noticed. His pen stopped mid-note. He wasn't sure why, but it looked deliberate, like a quiet flag planted in enemy soil. She let the noise wash over her. Every slight, every dismissal, each one a data point, each one logged, because this was the test. Not of her, of them. The phone in her hand buzzed once, silent against her palm. She didn't look at the screen. Didn't need to. She had set the timing before she even entered the building. The world outside this boardroom already knew what was about to unfold. Inside, though, the room still believed she was nobody. And that belief was about to cost them $5 billion. The meeting pressed forward, or tried to. Slides clicked on the screen, charts of revenue, forecasts, and merger strategies. But the tension didn't ease. It coiled tighter, wound around the air like barbed wire. "Let's proceed without distractions," one director muttered, eyes darting to her. His tone was smooth, but the knife edge was clear. Another leaned closer to the silver-haired woman and whispered just loud enough, "She doesn't belong at this table. This is a $5 billion transaction, not an internship." Snickers, quiet, but poisonous. She remained still, gaze steady, pen poised above her notes. Not a flicker of irritation, not even a sigh. Her silence unsettled them more than outrage ever could. The silver-haired woman sharpened the attack. "Look, whoever brought her in clearly misunderstood the gravity of today's discussion. This isn't a workshop. We're deciding the future of the company." A man in a pinstripe suit leaned back, chuckling. "And apparently, we've opened the floor to visitors." He let the word hang like an insult. Another added, "This is a closed session. She needs to step out before we proceed." Their confidence fed on each other, louder with every jab. They weren't just dismissing her, they were performing for the room, staking territory in front of their peers. The junior associate in the corner felt his jaw tighten. His hand hovered over his phone, tempted to lift it and record the ugliness openly. But something in the woman's composure held him back. She hadn't asked for an audience. She hadn't demanded defense. She was building something slower, heavier. The smirks multiplied. "Maybe she's here to take notes," one said, laughing at his own joke. "Or refill the coffee." The silver-haired woman folded her arms, voice rising above the rest. "This table is for board members and stakeholders only. If you don't hold a seat, you don't have a voice." That line hit the air hard, final, almost triumphant. Heads nodded around the table. Agreement hummed like static. Still, she didn't rise, didn't leave. She drew a slow breath, adjusted the cuff of her sleeve, and wrote one word across her pad. Nobody saw it but her. Protocol. The clock on the wall ticked louder than the conversation. Outside, beyond the boardroom's sealed doors, the building pulsed with quiet order assistants, analysts, and attorneys already moving pieces she had set in motion. But inside, the chorus of dismissal grew. The pinstripe man leaned forward now, voice direct. "With all respect, ma'am, you're not listed on today's agenda. This matter doesn't concern you." And there it was, the open door to shove her out. Every eye turned again, waiting for her to shrink, to stand, to retreat. Instead, she smiled. Small, unreadable, the kind of smile that unsettles because it promises something unseen. And for the first time, doubt flickered in the room. The insults didn't stop. They swirled, layered over one another, snickers, coughs disguised as laughter, pointed remarks about credentials and eligibility. It was a storm of voices, each one trying to drown her out, to erase her before she could even speak. But she didn't raise her voice. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she reached for her pen again and let it rest gently across her notepad. One fingertip tapped once, steady, like a metronome in the chaos. That single gesture seemed louder than any of their words. The silver-haired woman leaned forward, irritation sharpening. "Why is she still here?" she demanded, her tone slicing the room. "This is a board meeting, not an open lobby. Someone show her the door." A director on the far side laughed, eager to pile on. "She's probably lost. Or maybe someone brought her in to take dictation. Either way, she doesn't belong." The junior associate in the corner stiffened, every word sinking heavier into the air. He wanted to speak up. He wanted to say, "This isn't right." But then he looked at her calm, unbothered, poised as though she were sculpted from the very marble that lined the walls. She didn't need rescuing. She was choosing this silence. And that choice was louder than any defense he could muster. One of the men leaned closer, voice dripping disdain. "If you're not going to leave, at least stay quiet while the adults work." The line drew muted laughter. But when their chuckles faded, something else pressed against them, her stillness. Because silence, in a room addicted to power plays and interruptions, was unnerving. It was unnatural. It forced them to hear themselves echo. She opened her portfolio slowly, the hinge creaking faintly. Inside, papers were neatly arranged, untouched until now. She flipped one page with deliberate care, as if she were unbothered by the circus unraveling around her. The man in pinstripes frowned, unsettled. "Is she ignoring us?" Yes, and no. She was cataloging them, one insult at a time. Their words weren't breaking her, they were building the case she already knew she would use. Across the table, another director shifted uncomfortably. Something about her silence didn't feel like defeat. It felt like strategy. The silver-haired woman smirked, mistaking composure for weakness. "Well, since you refuse to excuse yourself, we'll simply proceed as though you're not here." But even as she said it, Her voice wavered ever so slightly, because deep down, she felt it too. The storm wasn't in their noise. The storm was in her silence, and that silence was about to speak louder than all of them combined. In the corner, almost forgotten, the junior associate shifted in his chair. His tie was too tight, his notebook already full of half-legible scribbles, but his eyes were sharp. He had watched this scene spiral for 10 minutes, the mockery stacking higher, the arrogance dripping thicker. And now, with the air so heavy it was hard to breathe, he slid his phone out beneath the table. One tap, the red light blinked alive. Recording. Not for gossip, not for clicks, for truth, for record. Across the table, a guest attorney brought in for compliance. Not politics sat straighter. She was Latina, mid-30s, quiet until now. Her gaze flicked between the white-suited woman and the cluster of men laughing at their own cruelty. Her jaw clenched. She didn't raise her phone. She didn't move, but her eyes narrowed, memorizing each word, each insult. The directors didn't notice. Why would they? In their minds, the room was theirs. The woman in white was already erased, reduced to a prop for their performance. "Let's return to the agenda," Pinstripe Man insisted, flipping papers he hadn't even read. "Market valuations, projected synergy, and cost reductions. The real conversation." His words felt hollow, brittle. Even the junior associate could hear it. His hands shook slightly over the phone, but he didn't stop recording. He wanted evidence of how power revealed itself when it thought no one was watching. The attorney finally spoke, voice measured but laced with steel. "For the record, I'd like to note that this meeting has included language that borders on discriminatory." Head snapped toward her, startled. The silver-haired woman scoffed. "Oh, please, don't exaggerate. We're simply clarifying attendance." "Clarifying," the attorney repeated softly, almost to herself. Her eyes drifted back to the woman in white, still calm, still silent. Something about that composure told her this wasn't exaggeration at all. This was a pattern, a performance replayed across decades, across industries, now captured in real time. The laughter didn't return as quickly this time. A few directors glanced at one another, unease flickering beneath their practiced bravado. The power of mockery works best, unchallenged, but now, the challenge had begun, not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable. The junior associate leaned back slightly, phone still glowing under the table. His chest tightened, adrenaline running. He wanted to say something, but the woman in white silence held him still. She didn't need his words yet. She needed his witness, and he understood. Because history doesn't shift with noise, it shifts with proof. In that boardroom, proof was quietly collecting. In a phone's memory, in a lawyer's notes, in the widening cracks of certainty spreading across the table. The directors carried on, voices straining to reclaim normalcy. But the storm had already widened. Two witnesses now, silent, steady, and both knew they weren't watching a mistake. They were watching a reckoning assemble piece by piece. The screen glowed with bar charts and projections, but no one was looking at numbers anymore. The real agenda had shifted the spectacle of exclusion. Pinstripe Man pushed his chair back, the leather creaking. His voice rang clearer now, sharp and deliberate. "This is unacceptable. A $5 billion decision is not open seating. If she's not on the board, she has no business here. Period." The silver-haired woman smirked, emboldened. "Agreed. Someone call security. We can't waste another second entertaining distractions." Gasps fluttered from the junior associate in the corner. His phone trembled in his hand. Security. Over presence alone. Over silence. The attorney's pen scratched harder against her notepad. She didn't interrupt yet, but her eyes burned. One of the older directors adjusted his cufflinks, leaning forward like a judge passing sentence. "I don't care whose assistant she is. She does not sit at this table. She does not speak. And if she refuses to leave, we'll have her escorted out." The words fell like gavels, each one louder than the last. Across the table, another director chuckled low, cruel. "She should be grateful we even let her through the door." A ripple of uneasy laughter followed, but it wasn't unanimous anymore. A few faces stiffened. Some eyes flicked toward the attorney, toward the junior associate, toward the silent woman in white whose calm presence made their mockery sound thin. Still, the silver-haired woman pressed harder. "I'll handle it." She reached for the intercom at the edge of the table. "Security to boardroom 12. The words echoed, cold and rehearsed, like she'd said them before. The junior associate's heart pounded. He wanted to shout stop. He wanted to slam his phone onto the table and play back every cruel remark. But then he looked again at the woman in white, her stillness, her eyes steady, unshaken. She gave him nothing but calm, and he understood. Not yet. The attorney finally lifted her head. For the record, this escalation is unnecessary. She has not spoken, not disrupted, not interfered. Yet you're calling security. Why? The silver-haired woman snapped, because she doesn't belong. That sentence struck like a whip. Not hidden, not subtle, brutal in its clarity. The air thickened. The portraits of old executives seemed to glare down from the walls, silent witnesses to a repetition centuries old. The woman in white closed her portfolio, slowly, deliberately, not rushed, not rattled. She placed her pen on top, folded her hands, and sat back in her chair. She didn't protest, didn't plead, didn't move. Her silence forced the room to hear itself. And in that silence, the ugliness of their words hung naked, undeniable. Security was on its way, but so was something far stronger. The boardroom door cracked open. 2 security officers stepped inside, their dark uniforms stark against the polished wood and white marble. They moved with the quiet certainty of men used to following orders. The silver-haired woman didn't waste a second. She pointed across the table, her manicured fingers steady like a spear. Remove her from this meeting. The words rang loud, final, carried the weight of someone who believed authority was never to be questioned. The officers paused, glancing at one another. It wasn't hesitation born of doubt, but of surprise. Rarely were they summoned to a boardroom, the supposed temple of order and discipline. Pinstripe Man leaned back, smug. This is what happens when we let standards slip. Better late than never. Another director muttered, escort her out quietly. She's wasting our time. The junior associate's pulse hammered in his throat. His phone recorded everything, the laughter, the command, the summoning of force against silence itself. He wanted to stand, to protest. But again, his eyes flicked to the woman in white, calm, anchored, as if none of this touched her, as if she were carved from stone. One of the security guards stepped forward. Ma'am, we need you to come with us. The silver-haired woman folded her arms, savoring the moment. This board doesn't have time for theatrics. She doesn't belong, and we all know it. The attorney's voice finally broke the wall. Firm, resonant. She hasn't spoken a word. She hasn't broken protocol. And yet you treat her like a trespasser? This is misconduct. The silver-haired woman turned, eyes sharp. Counsel, you're overstepping. You don't decide who belongs here. Silence thickened again. All eyes drifted back to the woman in white. She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them, gaze level, unwavering. She didn't rise. She didn't resist. She simply folded her hands tighter over her portfolio, her phone resting neatly beside it. One guard reached toward her chair. The junior associate gripped his pen so hard it nearly snapped. The attorney rose halfway from her seat. But before anyone else could move, the silver-haired woman hissed her final insult, venom dripping in every word. You're a fraud, a prop, an intruder in a place you will never earn. The insult landed like a slap, harsh, unforgiving, the ugliest line yet, carved into the marble air of the boardroom. The woman in white didn't answer. Not yet. She let the silence absorb the cruelty, let the witnesses feel its weight, let the arrogance echo in its rawest form, because she knew this was the moment they had gone too far. And once you cross that line, there is no return. The guard's hand hovered inches from her arm. The air froze. The storm had reached its peak. And in the stillness, something shifted. Not in her, in them. Because for the first time, the question wasn't, why is she here? It was what happens when she finally speaks. The guard's hand hovered, the room holding its breath. Every second stretched long, taut like a wire about to snap. Then movement. Not panic, not protest. Just her hand, slow and precise, lifting the phone from the polished wood table. She didn't look at the guards. She didn't acknowledge the silver-haired woman still bristling with false triumph. She raised the phone to her ear and spoke 2 words, quiet but cutting through the tension like glass breaking. Proceed. Protocol. The shift was instant. On the other end, far beyond the boardroom's walls, gears turned. Screens lit up. Emails queued. Security systems logged the timestamp. She hadn't raised her voice, but her command carried weight heavier than any shout in that room. The silver-haired woman frowned, momentarily thrown. What do you think you're doing? The woman in white set the phone down gently, her expression unreadable. Mark the time, she said, more to herself than anyone else. They'll need the record. The junior associate blinked. His pen slipped from his grip, landing with a soft click against his notepad. He realized he was holding his breath. The phone in his lap kept recording, but now he understood. The real evidence wasn't his anymore. The evidence was bigger, woven into systems. None of them in this room even knew existed. One of the directors scoffed, desperate to reclaim control. "This is ridiculous. Protocol? What protocol?" Her gaze slid to him, calm, deliberate, the kind that decides whether this deal lives or dies. The laughter that followed was nervous, thinner than before. The attorney leaned forward, eyes narrowing. She had heard enough boardroom battles to know when the tide was shifting. And this was no ordinary guest at the table. The silver-haired woman forced a smile, voice sharp. "Empty words. You're bluffing." But her own confidence cracked. The guards hesitated, glancing to one another again. They were trained to follow orders, not to wade into power struggles they didn't understand. The woman in white folded her hands, her voice level. "Stand down. I won't repeat myself." And strangely, they did. They stepped back, not retreating, but no longer advancing. The entire boardroom felt it, authority moving, almost invisibly, away from those who had mocked and toward the woman they had tried to erase. The silver-haired woman slammed her palm on the table. "Enough of this. She's nobody. She has no standing here." But the words rang weaker this time, because in the stillness that followed, every person at that table felt it. She wasn't nobody. She was the only one in the room acting like she had nothing to prove because she didn't. And for the first time, fear flickered not in her, but in them. The silver-haired woman tried to fill the silence with bluster. "You're stalling. Security will return. This meeting isn't yours." But the words no longer landed the way she wanted. The guards had already stepped back. The laughter had already thinned. And the woman in white, still composed, still calm, rose from her chair for the first time. The scrape of wood against marble was deafening. Every head turned. She stood tall, unhurried, her portfolio under one arm, her phone still resting on the table like a quiet anchor. Her gaze swept the length of the board, steady and unblinking. When she spoke, her voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. It carried the weight of ownership. "You've spent the last half hour debating whether I belong here. Let me make it clear." A pause, long enough for the words to land, heavy and inescapable. "I am the majority shareholder of this company. This board does not move without me." The air cracked, chairs shifted, mouths opened, but no words came. The junior associate's phone slipped from his hand, clattering onto the carpet. He didn't bother to pick it up. His wide eyes stayed locked on her. The attorney leaned back slowly, a quiet smile ghosting her lips. Recognition. Confirmation. But around the table, chaos. Pinstripe Man sputtered. That's impossible. The majority shares are held by me," she cut in, calm as a blade. "Acquired quietly, consolidated strategically, finalized last quarter. The filings are public. You simply never bothered to look." The silver-haired woman's face drained of color. "You're lying. This is a stunt." The woman in white tilted her head, almost pitying. "If I were lying, the system wouldn't have executed my command 10 minutes ago. Check your inboxes." Phones buzzed, laptops blinked, notifications rolled in like waves, a flurry of subject lines, ownership confirmation, shareholder directive, board authority update, hands fumbled, screens lit up, and with every opened email, the truth landed harder. The woman in white watched it all unfold, still composed, still silent in her victory. Finally, she spoke again, voice low but resonant. "You told me I don't belong, but I own the very table you're sitting at. The only question left is whether you belong." The room froze. No one laughed. No one dared. The balance of power had flipped in a single revelation. And for the first time since the meeting began, the silence belonged to her. The silence after her words wasn't peaceful. It was crushing. Emails pinged. Notifications stacked. Each vibration on the table was another nail in the coffin of their certainty. The silver-haired woman's hands trembled as she fumbled with her tablet. "This can't be right, someone. Check the filings. This is fraud." Her voice cracked. The conviction that had once carried every insult was unraveling thread by thread. Pinstripe Man scrolled furiously through his phone, his face blanching with every flick of the screen. "It's true," he muttered under his breath, but loud enough for those beside him to hear. She owns controlling shares." The words spread like a virus. Eyes widened. Chairs creaked as bodies shifted uneasily. The fortress of arrogance collapsed into rubble in real time. One director pulled at his collar, sweat darkening his shirt. Another whispered, "My God," as if he'd seen something unholy. The junior associate, still frozen, realized his recording wasn't necessary anymore. The truth was recording itself in their faces, in their panic, in the tidal wave of evidence they could no longer outrun. The attorney closed her notepad slowly, her lips curving into something rare in this room. Satisfaction. She looked across at the woman in white and gave the smallest nod, silent recognition of a war finally turning. The silver-haired woman slammed her palm on the table again, but this time the sound was hollow. "This doesn't give you the right to disrupt proceedings." Ugh. The woman in white met her gaze, calm, unshaken. "I didn't disrupt. I own." Gasps rippled. Even the guards still standing by the door shifted awkwardly, realizing the orders they'd been given minutes ago had no standing now. Pinstripe Man leaned forward, desperate. "If this is true, we can negotiate terms, perhaps restructure the deal." "No," she replied simply. The single syllable dropped like a gavel. Final, unappealable. The attorney broke the tension with quiet authority. "From a legal standpoint, she's correct. This board cannot proceed without her consent, and she's just withdrawn it." The room deflated. All the posturing, the smirks, the insults, they evaporated, leaving only fear. The junior associate finally exhaled, his pen rolling off the table. He watched them squirm, and for the first time, he felt pride in silence. He wasn't just a witness to humiliation, he was a witness to justice. The woman in white let the silence sit, heavy, until even the portraits on the wall seemed to lean forward, acknowledging the shift. Then she spoke again, her tone as measured as it had been since the beginning. "You told me I don't belong. You laughed. You tried to erase me. Now you will answer to me." And every face at that table knew. The storm was no longer coming. It was here. The boardroom smelled of panic, cold sweat, hot breath, the faint ozone of power short-circuiting. The silver-haired woman still clung to denial. You can't just walk in here and dictate terms. This deal has months of work behind it, billions at stake." The woman in white slid her phone across the table. The screen glowed with a single open document. Shareholder directive, immediate execution. Her finger hovered above one line, steady, unhurried. "You're right," she said softly. "Billions are at stake. 5 billion to be exact." Her finger tapped. One word lit the screen. "Cancel." Gasps erupted. Pinstripe Man surged forward, his chair scraping loud against the floor. "Wait! You don't understand the implications, jobs, markets, entire divisions." She cut him off without raising her voice. "I understand perfectly. What I don't accept is arrogance disguised as leadership. This board has shown me exactly what it is, and now you will live with the consequences." Across the room, phones buzzed again. The attorney's laptop pinged with confirmation. Merger terminated. Assets frozen. Board vote overridden by majority shareholder authority. The silver-haired woman's face collapsed into disbelief. You can't. This is madness." The woman in white leaned forward, her tone sharp as glass. "What's madness is thinking you could humiliate me in my own house and walk away with my signature. That era ends today." The guards at the door exchanged glances. One muttered under his breath, "It's over." The junior associate sat frozen, goosebumps prickling his skin. He had just watched $5 billion vanish with a single tap. Not vanishing into chaos, but vanishing into justice. Directors scrambled, voices colliding in panic. "We'll renegotiate. There must be an appeal process. We can salvage." She stood taller, silencing them with nothing but her presence. "No renegotiation. No appeal. You don't lose 5 billion because I'm reckless. You lose 5 billion because you were arrogant." The attorney finally spoke into the stunned air, her words formal but heavy. "For the record, the shareholder has exercised her full authority. The deal is dead." Silence fell. This time, not mocking, not dismissive, just silence. Heavy, absolute. The woman in white gathered her portfolio, her voice calm, final. "Next time you decide who belongs, remember what it costs to be wrong." And with that, the weight of $5 billion collapsed around them, not with an explosion, but with a single, irreversible decision. No one moved. The numbers on the screen meant nothing now. The charts, the projections, the polished presentations, they all dissolved into irrelevance. What remained was silence, thick as ash, heavy with the weight of what had just collapsed. $5 billion. Gone. The The silver-haired woman sank into her chair, staring at her useless tablet. Pinstripe Man rubbed his temples, muttering half-formed apologies that went nowhere. Other directors stared at the table, avoiding her eyes, their arrogance shattered into fragments too sharp to touch. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She gathered her portfolio with calm precision, slid her phone into her pocket, and stood. The junior associate's breath caught. He had just witnessed the impossible delivered in silence. He would never forget it. The attorney closed her notepad, voice quiet but clear. For the record, today will be remembered. The woman in white glanced at her, a flicker of acknowledgement, then turned to the room. Her words were measured, each one cutting deeper than any insult they had thrown. You told me I don't belong. You laughed, you dismissed, you tried to erase me. But I don't need your permission to sit at this table. I built the table. I bought the walls around it. And I own the ground beneath your feet. The air trembled. She paused, letting the truth land in every corner of the room, in every shallow breath, in every trembling hand. Then, she delivered the final line, the one that would echo long after she was gone. You mistook my silence for weakness. That was your last mistake. The drop of a mic without ever holding one. She turned, walking toward the door. The guards stepped aside instantly, eyes lowered. No longer enforcers, but witnesses. The portraits of old power loomed overhead, but for the first time, they looked small. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Inside, the directors sat frozen in ruin. Outside, the world was already moving. Emails, spreading, news alerts, pinging, phones buzzing with the shockwave of a $5 billion deal undone in less than an hour. The junior associate finally picked up his phone, hands shaking. He had recorded history, but even without the footage, the story would travel. Not because she shouted, not because she fought, but because she stood, silent, unmoved, unbreakable. And somewhere, someone watching the headlines would whisper the truth that every person in that boardroom now knew: power doesn't ask for a seat, it brings its own.